Welcome to Theory Underground. This is MCM Prime at Theory Underground on Capital Mondays, which is a weekly event recorded on Mondays and then published on Sundays. If you want to be there on Mondays when it is recorded live, the best way to get involved is to become a subscriber, which you can find about in the description below, or wait until the end of this video to hear more about. But for now, all you need to know is it always goes public on Sundays. And then that way, when you go to work on Monday, you'll be able to listen to the rest of it, assuming that you caught some of it on Sunday. So that's kind of the idea. It's a good way to start your Monday is thinking about what is capital and trying to understand how capital is. Like, what is the logic of capital in the 21st century? That's what we're trying to figure out here, because that's an essential component of trying to figure out the situation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over here to the pre-recorded thing from last Monday, which was recorded on March 4th. This is the first lecture by Sahil in a series of lectures on reading Das Kapital. Hope you enjoy. We're live. Welcome everybody to Capital Mondays, aka C-M-T Prime, the podcast. Capital Mondays at Theory Underground. Today's a really exciting day. Nance and I are going to get to chill, kind of, sort of, compared to normal. Anybody who listened to the last episode will know that Sahil is going to be, for the foreseeable future, giving lectures on the first Monday of every month. And we came to that conclusion just over the weekend. And this is the first Monday of the month. And so it's perfect timing. He'll be lecturing on chapter 1 of Capital. And all of us, I think, as we are on the one hand trying to think through what is capital, and thinking about the questions of interpretation for approaching this project, we'll be taking notes, not just on the particular kind of reading that Sahil brings to the table, which is largely, I don't want to say to blame or due to, but is like he's standing on the shoulders of probably the most beast mode group of Marxists in the world. That's Radical Notes, and I say that like not joking. Like I was saying this to Nance and Rudy yesterday. Like, who would you rather, learn from? And where do you think you'll find the best Marxists? You think you'll find the best Marxist in America, where there's like one communist party and there's only 20 people in it? Or do you think that, the best Marxist is going to come from a country that has 200 communist parties and like some of them are actually blowing shit up? And, like that, it's like that to be a Marxist who's like, I disagree with the main tendencies here. Obviously, you're going to benefit if you're in that context, as opposed to the US, where you don't really get to see these contradictions play out. But then there's something even cooler, and that's the Radical Notes folks. There's an actual milieu there, right? And it's not just an individual thing. And so it's like you got a lot of people who've put in a lot of work over the decades leading up until now. And so I'm just really grateful and honored, Sahil, that you're doing this and that we're all able to kind of collaborate in this way. But with that said, everybody go put your hands together here for Sahil. Let's go. Let's do it.
All right. Thank you, Dave, for those amazing words. I'm not great, as good as you guys with beginnings, but so what I'm just gonna do is sort of try to just jump in. And okay, so the idea for today is I'll try to set up the plan or set an introduction for the reading in terms of starting from the beginning, but sort of looking at what really the project really is, right? Like what is Marx's project. So for that, in a sense, so over the 3 volumes, and which is Marx, it's an unfinished project, right? Marx never actually finished all the books that he wanted to write, like all the volumes for it. And we have access to three to the extent that he did write, right? So the third one, so the general structure of the whole project is that, starting from the first chapter of the first book, where he will essentially approach the most abstract, the most simple, or the most essential forms of this. What will go into is the social being as it exists and in the current moment. He begins from that most essential, most abstract forms, and from there on, he will develop at various steps over to the more concrete forms of manifestation that these essential forms take. Right. So that's the idea. So, for example, in the first book itself, we will look at how value, which is the abstract, simple abstract form, will take on and or is also the essence of commodities. We'll take a look at how it presents itself in the concrete in the form of money. So that, for example, is one of such forms or such movements, right, from the abstract to the concrete. Another, for an example, is the movement from surplus value as it will present itself in the form of profit. So where they're not exactly identical and yet they are forms of manifestations, right? So profit, as we'll look at it later on, right? And so from the various steps, or not only profit, but even rent and credit, all of these things, as they will be developed later on third volume, they are different forms in which value concretizes itself, right, becomes a concrete form. So this broadly we can say is going to be the structure of the readings, right, which is Marx's Capital. I guess partly along with that, what I want to begin with, which is a related point, which is another question, why read Capital today? Given that it's been 150, more than 150 years, right? And yeah, it's so much has changed over this time, right? And the capitalism, for one, or there are all these questions about, well, isn't capitalism itself something different today than what it was when Marx was writing about it? Or let's just say, well, isn't society very different today than what it was when Marx was writing it? So we often, especially today, we often come up across this question: okay, what is true and what is no longer true in Marx or in Marx's presentation of capitalism or of society? All these kinds of questions. So the thing is, at least this will be my claim through this reading, that, well, it's all true in a sense, which is to say, and yeah, and then okay, partly I'm going to make like some seemingly exaggerated claims. So we'll get through them, go through them as we move along. Okay, so one of them being, yeah, it's all true. What that means is it's all true, and how can it be even true? How can I even say something like this? Well, partly because the changes, the differences that we see, right? Because Marx is already locating, as he's approaching the society or the capitalist society in his own time, he's already approaching it at two levels, right? Say this would be the dual character which he will sort of recognize or encounter in almost all things, both the commodity and the labor. There is the dual character, and that dual character isn't limited only to the commodity, which is the product of our labors, but also to the labor itself that went into producing that. So that dual character is not limited only to those two, but rather to society as such. So what that means is, for example, and which is what Marx himself is laying out in the book, is at first he's laying out its sort of more essential level or the more abstract level, and then there is its concrete level, and that is half the whole story, is basically this whole movement, this whole relation between the abstract and the concrete, or which will be again that dual character, which will be seen at various different moments, various different instances, right? Applies in the same sense to society as such, where there is an abstract character of the society, and then that abstract character as what we experience as time moving forward, or change, right, history, that it is that abstract character, or that history is the various concrete forms in which that abstract character manifests itself. That is the history that we experience, and which is where also the dialectic or the contradiction or the sort of complication of, well, there is history, but there hasn't been any history comes up, where Marx at one point will say, there was history, but now there is none. Like, and which is why that's a special character of value itself, that it presents, at least, and this is something we'll get into. It presents itself as something timeless. It has no history. Okay, or another way, it value presents itself as transcendent. So we'll sort of look at that. Okay, to arrive at that, then, okay, well, so as will, and this basically, I'm beginning from all of this partly because this is, in a certain sense, I am taking off where Marx himself is really taking off in this book, which can be said that oftentimes is not really emphasized enough in the same sense. Which, what I'm talking about is essentially the first sentence of the first chapter, right? But like, before we get there, or rather, let me just state it, right? The first sentence of the chapter is basically saying that wealth of society, or the wealth of societies where the capitalist mode of in which the capitalist mode of production prevails, appears as an immense collection of commodities. Right now, that's all for now that I'll be citing from here. Right, but the point being, why bring this up, or why sort of begin sort of, in a sense, from where Marx is beginning, is because, as Marx will say in the preface to the critique of, to the contribution to the critique of political economy, right? It is not consciousness that determines being, it is rather the social being that determines our consciousness. Now, he has said that in that other context, but what I'm sort of arguing is that is precisely where Marx is really beginning from in his major book itself, right? Das Kapital, even though he's not putting it in those exact same words, and yet when we look at this first sentence, that is precisely the starting point, which is the social being. And what is that social being, or what is the nature of that social being? It is societies in which the capitalist mode of production prevails. It is that totality, society as this totality that exists already. It is already given, in which then we will locate and will encounter all these various elements that that compose it, right? So now, for one, the point was to highlight, in a certain sense, the connection between the starting point of the first chapter of Marx, which is the wealth appearing as commodities, and then we'll also go into the relation between wealth and the immense collection of commodities. But prior to that, just for now, just focusing on the fact that what he's saying is he's locating both wealth and its form of appears as collection of commodities within. This is the wealth of societies where the capitalist mode of production prevails. So now, for now, just focusing on this societies where the capitalist mode of production prevails, right? We need to read this, we need to think of this in relation to what Marx says about, okay, how is consciousness determined, right? It is determined by the social being, right? So now what is that social being? This is what essentially will unfold as we move forward through the chapter and through the whole exposition of Capital with all its volumes, right? The point being, okay, so what is this thing, right? The social being, it itself, for one, it is composed of all these various elements, right? Which is there are various ways to approach it, really. So, and this is a point that Marx will sort of make in the Grundrisse regarding method, right? Which is essentially that, at first we can start with population, for example, right, as a given whole, as a given totality. However, the population is nothing without the classes of which it is composed, and then we further break it down. Okay, those different classes are nothing without, say, capital or labor, or all these different categories, and slowly analytically we keep breaking it down, and until we reach its most simplest, most abstract, simple determinations. And once we reach that, then there is a different movement to reproduce, essentially, that the starting point, which was which Marx calls a chaotic whole, right, or a chaotic notion of the whole, right. So now from the simple determinations, we will uh, build it towards a reproduction of the concrete totality, right, which, so instead, where we had, in a sense, one can say, we began with society, for example, population as this totality which forms our society. When we break it down first to its simple determinations, and when we build through those simple determinations back up towards the concrete whole, what we arrive at, for example, is not society as such, but class societies, which is a internally contradictory whole, right. So and then what we have is actually critical form determinations as against ideological notions or something, right. And to this, and I'll come back from this to the social being, right. So the point at the same time being, so Marx is, we know, Marx is a materialist. Marx is a materialist as against Hegel, who was this idealist, right? But the point oftentimes one can miss is the character, the nature of this materialism. It is not a materialism simply of, insofar as we are materialists, we only consider, material things in this concrete, physical, sensuous sense. No. Marx's materialism is really a materialism of abstractions, which sounds counterintuitive, right? Which would seem, and because abstractions, we assume that abstractions are results of thinking, whereas materiality is a category of reality itself, rather, right? So now what's going to happen is, so this social being, again, which we, in a certain sense, when we arrived at the concrete totality of class societies. Now, in a certain sense, why Marx only begins in a sense, signaling the starting point without actually, I'm gonna try to put this out again.
I mean, at this point, it's like a gimmick or something,
Yeah.
For the people who don't have eyes on screen, it's just the Sahil, whenever he makes the hand motions accidentally, it triggers the silly graphics, I guess.
Yeah, and now I do have that turned off. It was already off, and yet it somehow still came up. Whatever. All right, I'm gonna resume. Right. So as we develop back to that concrete totality, right? Yeah. And so Marx, all he's doing at the beginning, he's not actually going through all of this, right? I mean, even so much as he said in Grundrisse regarding method and the starting point, the sort of concrete, because it's almost, and this is maybe just to mention this is like this is part of his Hegelian sort of method, right, to an extent, that he will begin with, for example, wealth itself, right, the immediate, in a certain sense, wealth as it immediately presents itself to us, or these societies, or society as it immediately presents itself to us, we almost like take it as it is, and yet immediately realize that we are actually, what we have is not the most concrete, or not the most immediate, but rather the most mediated, aspect, right? We are actually not that. All right. So, all right. Now the thing is, so on the one hand, Marx talks about how consciousness is determined by the social being. And so in Capital, he will begin with this, societies where the capitalist mode of production prevails, in which we look at wealth. In the German ideology, right, again, with the preface itself, and it's interesting that these are all in various ways starting points for Marx, right? In German ideology, he'll begin with a critique of the young Hegelians, right? Which how he puts it is that it's a fun sort of a quote, and I guess I will quote a bit of it. Right? He begins, hitherto, men have always formed wrong ideas about themselves, about what they are and what they ought to be. They have arranged their relations according to their ideas of God, of normal man, etc. The products of their brains have got out of their hands. They, the creators, have bowed down before their creations. Let us liberate them from the chimeras, the ideas, dogmas, imaginary beings under the yoke of which they are pining away. Let us revolt against this rule of concepts. Let us teach men, says one, how to exchange these imaginations for thoughts which correspond to the essence of man. Says another, how to take up a critical attitude to them. Says the third, how to get them out of their heads, and existing reality will collapse. Now, the important thing is, this is Marx's, in a certain sense, caricature of the young Hegelians. What he's saying is not what Marx thinks. He's beginning with his, almost like a ridicule of their position, which is, and then he sort of goes on to say, these innocent and childlike fancies are the kernel of the modern young Hegelians. Right? It is this volume's aim, now the German ideology's aim, to ridicule and discredit the philosophic struggle with the shadows of reality, that philosophical struggle of the young Hegelians, which is their struggle with the shadows of reality. So why I bring this up is to point one thing first out, which is what, again, Marx is, as we'll go to the last part of the first chapter, this will come up. And I know I'm to an extent, jumping back and forth in a certain sense, but this is all still a way, to help us begin here, which is that this is essentially the point of, commodity fetishism, or the idea that, so for this young Hegelians, partly, it was almost like, okay, yeah, we recognized, correctly now, these false notions that us men, women, whatever, like all of us have in our heads, right, about our reality, about society, about ourselves. And so, as critics of this society, we should teach men to think correctly, essentially, to have correct ideas about this reality. And if that is the case, then this false reality should collapse, right? But precisely here, this is Marx's materialism of abstraction. That his point is that these abstractions, which are these false notions inside the heads of men, right? These false notions as these thought abstractions, their source, the source of these abstractions and the source of these false notions does not lie inside their heads, but rather in the reality itself. And so the point being that these abstractions themselves are part of reality. That, for example, this social being itself is already an abstract social being, right? All the practices that constitute the social being are abstract realities, right? These are abstractions. These are real abstractions, right? These are not errors in thinking, but there are material reasons, right? There's a material source for these false notions, right? And that material source is an abstract source, right? So for example, society itself is an abstraction, but it's a real abstraction, but real abstraction not as the chaotic notion of society, but rather as we will have to develop it towards as a concrete whole, right? So this just to say, yeah, to sort of lay down part of this essentially what is the starting point for Marx. Now, I guess another aspect to this starting point itself, to the extent that this materialism is a materialism of abstraction, or rather for Marx, the starting point, which is society, or the character of the society itself, is both abstract and partly false, right? It is both abstract and false. It is this reality itself, and which is why, so which will be for Marx, the source of our false notions, but not false notions in any sense, but specifically even, and this is where, one can bring in the famous Marx quote partly, I guess, or I mean, so for Marx, for example, as against Feuerbach, which also follows in with this one, the point of the critique of religion, for example, isn't simply, again, religion is not simply this mistake in thinking, right? That we are simply misrecognizing that, oh yeah, we have simply alienated our own notion of the collectivity, or our own collectivity as this alienated form in the form of God, right? That there is as if this external entity which is God, which is the all powerful, but in truth this is the form of our alienated consciousness into this entity called God, right? What Marx is saying is, no, even this alienation in a certain sense itself is inverted. What is happening is, so it is not from our consciousness that God, in a certain sense, or it is not our alienated consciousness that escapes us and becomes this material thing outside, but rather even this false notion of a God as a real existing external thing, it is an inverted image inside our heads of our alienated social reality itself, right? So the point is that our social reality, because it is already alienated, right, that this appears to us in the form of God. Or another way to put this is, so this social being that for Marx is the starting point, the social being itself has a metaphysical and a theological character, which is precisely why it is the source, or it is basically the reason why it doesn't matter how much one may think correctly, doesn't matter how much one can get rid of these false notions and false ideas, superstitions, anything like that about God or whatever, right? One still necessarily falls back or lapses back into metaphysical kind of thinking, because the source of our practice, and remember, it is the social being that determines our consciousness. So insofar as the social being itself is metaphysical, it is almost not possible to simply think one's way outside of this metaphysical reality itself, right? So which is why then, the 11th thesis on Feuerbach will say, philosophers have interpreted the world, the point is to change it, because one cannot simply interpret one's notion or one's way out of this metaphysical reality, right? Okay. So and then now as so this is just to sort of lay out again that first starting point, but now as Marx will unfold these simple categories, which will also begin with, right, the simple determinations, and from there on, as their mode of unfolding is developed, we'll basically see how where is this metaphysical, what is the character, what is the source also, right, what is the origin of this metaphysical aspect of reality, and how our concrete reality, our material, in a certain sense, material concrete reality turns into this inverted form whereby the abstract becomes primary and the concrete becomes its mode of manifestation, right? So okay, so before we do that, again, so the other aspects of that first sentence. So this is basically for regarding that, the aspect of the social being, or societies where the capitalist mode of production prevails, right? Now what about the other essentially two important aspects in that first sentence, which are wealth, right? Now, so okay, I mean, partly I was thinking of not taking any other proper names apart from Marx, from outside of Marx, but I guess I'll just, for one, I mean, it's obvious, like all of the things that I'm saying, they are already coming from a lot of different people and readings later, than Marx, right? But on the one hand, like partly I was thinking of not taking any names, just let it, be like that. But I guess this specific one, because partly this was brought to me specifically by only this one person, which is, and by a text, like not that I talked to that person. John Holloway has this text on basically the importance of just reading the first sentence. So I think the text is called read Capital, the first sentence. That's the name of the whole essay. Now, of course, my approach is going to be slightly different to that first sentence, but like just to notice, essentially that importance of this first sentence itself. Partly, credit goes to Holloway. Okay, so now or essentially the emphasis that he brings in is on the word wealth, right, or word or the term wealth, and then thereby emphasis on this relation, or what is really the relation between, in this sentence, between wealth and this immense collection of commodities, right? So um so yeah, now as we read this sentence, now one thing is pretty clear. Marx is laying out wealth is not, he's not saying wealth is identical to an immense collection of commodities. He's saying it appears as, right? And this much I think we've all noticed right till now. Now the point isn't simply that it's, yeah, so okay, let's think of it this way. For one, so wealth is something, and Marx hasn't defined what wealth is. Marx does not really, go ahead and actually lay it out. Okay, what is this concept of wealth that he's working with, of which then he would, demonstrate a certain mode, right? But through this relation itself, it is possible to arrive at some more details, which is, so for example, so wealth, insofar as it appears as an immense collection of commodities, it exists in a relation of essence and appearance to an extent, right? Let's pursue this line of thinking for a bit. So wealth is something which we don't really know, which we don't have direct access to, and Marx is not even gonna try doing that. He does not say, okay, after saying wealth appears as an immense collection of commodities, he does not say that, but let's first look at what wealth is, and then let's look at what its form of appearance is. No, he just goes straight up to what it appears as, the commodity, and he, jumps right in, right? He never really dives into what wealth is. But to that extent, we can say, so wealth is this essence which is only accessible to us through its form of appearance, which is the immense collection of commodities, right? Now, what I am going to essentially say is the in-between part of the sentence, the part that is in between wealth and the immense collection of commodities, between appears as, is essentially what also tells us that is the mediation, in a certain sense, between us and wealth, which is, again, we're back to the social being. It is this social totality, which is the societies in which the capitalist mode of production prevails. This is what lies in between what wealth truly, really may be, right, and what it appears as. So for us, we who are within societies where the capitalist mode of production prevails, for us, wealth is an immense collection of commodities. And yet, at the same time, through this sentence, we can also notice that then, insofar as if it is possible to be not within a capitalist mode of production or societies where the capitalist mode of production prevails, wealth would not necessarily appear as an immense collection of commodities, right? So these two aspects. So for one, wealth is something that transcends to an extent. It's still an empty sort of a term concept for us. We haven't yet defined in any sense, what are the contents of wealth. But what we can see is that wealth is something that goes beyond simply societies in which the capitalist mode of production prevails. And we at the same time are looking at its mode of appearance within this society. In societies in which capitalist mode of production prevails, appears as commodities. Now, this is so okay. Just to lay out, and I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting something about the first sentence itself. So I guess, we will essentially, as we move into the first chapter, we will already identify in certain ways how, to what extent we can actually sort of determine what wealth is. Although that will be limited for us because we belong to this social being, right? It will be limited to us to be approached in a certain sense through negation, through looking, through reducing or through negating how it appears in its present form. So it will still be marked to an extent by its present form. Okay. I'm wondering now, can we take a pause?
Yeah. Really quick, I want to say to the people who are watching this live, I did not mean to make this public on YouTube. That was an accident. There was only like, by the time I caught on to the fact that this was public on YouTube, there was like 7 people watching, and the numbers go up and down as time goes on. So because I think I caught it in the first like 3 minutes, I put it onto unlisted. And so nobody should be seeing it now, right? But to the like few of you who are hanging on, congratulations. You get to see a pre-release. This will be premiering on Sunday. Also, the other Sahil was in the chat, so that's funny. But anyway, there we go. I just figured I would share that out because it's a funny, weird thing that happened. But yeah, let's take a break for a second.
Yeah, just to check in, I guess I wanted to. Okay, just as for another aspect that I did not like, I was thinking that I will ask before we begin, how long do we want, this first session to be? Like,
I think
you should 10 hours.
5 hours, preferably, like, Daniel Garner said 2 days. Yeah. 10 hours or 2 days. That's, give or take. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, I just hope that you don't limit yourself, but you also don't I don't want you to overextend yourself. And so, if you want to do things like you were saying before we started recording, where you like, let's turn to this page and stuff. If there's, for instance, some pages you'd like us to mark up and pay close attention to as we, you've got time for all that kind of stuff.
All right. I guess what I'm saying now is, so to an extent, I mean, I'm just, catching up with myself to an extent, just trying to make sure, if I've missed anything, insofar as starting the whole thing goes. So I guess for one, I did not really, talk too much in terms of, the total project or whatever. I mean, even though sort of partly those things came in, but yeah. And so I was, because like partly why, again, I sort of asked for a pause right now is because now I think I was entering the text itself to an extent, like getting into, the main fundamental categories within the first chapter. Right. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of, make sure, how much of like, can I proceed, or if I've missed anything, or if you think maybe, something that I should.
And I think, if anything comes to mind later, you can always bring it back. We can always do that retroactive quilting stuff. But also, guys, if anybody else is like, no, you got to elaborate on this or whatever, go ahead and lean in. But I was just going to say really quick, it would be great to get like an unjust simplified, right? What's going on in each volume, and to kind of, and also, no, I think that's all. I think that's probably good. It's just like a quick little sketch of the breakdown of the 3.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, I have a question too before we continue. I'm reading along both the Penguin and the German original. And are you interested if I like notice translation stuff that I chime in, or like I will note it definitely and I can say something about it in the Q&A or something like that?
I guess we can definitely keep it for the Q&A for sure. That would be my take to, just to make sure, yeah. But like, just let it on though, like what aspects were you noticing maybe?
I was noticing something right in the first, and I think this is like a fundamental thing. This is why I brought it up, because it comes down to this like the tone that Marx is using, which I think from my reading of the Penguin edition in English, it kind of gets lost because there's a difference how in the original he writes this term immense collection of commodities. It's a different term and it has different aspects in German.
Okay. All right. I guess we can, thrash it out during the Q&A then, more detailed. Okay. All right. Let me just recalibrate. Yeah. I guess, I think I'll just move ahead then, like go into, the specific categories of the first chapter. That sounds, yeah. What do you think? Does it seem, like good enough? I don't know. For now.
Man, I think you're hitting on all this sort of things people often will kind of hit on when setting up a reading capital. I guess, could you kind of clarify the significance of saying that the wealth of society appears as an immense collection of commodities? I mean, I think we all get that. Whenever a German says that something appears, what they're saying is, but that's not it, guys, and like that. So we all get that, but what is the significance of starting it out this way? I guess.
I mean, okay, all right. Yeah. So, all right. Let's go. Let's resume. Yeah, I'll basically from these 2 points, and then we move forward. Yeah. Sounds good. Whenever, let me know. Should I just?
Oh, are you at? No, we never really technically paused. We're
all right.
It's still going. I mean, yeah. No, you go when you're ready. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah. To the extent that, okay, let me try to address these 2 things. Okay. First of all, yeah. Why begin here? Right. Why begin with this? That is. That's basically the point, that it is, so we are not going to look at any of these categories, any of these elements, or even when we isolate them, even when we look at them in a certain sense in isolation by themselves, we are never truly looking at them in isolation. The givenness of this social being, as part of which we are looking at, like we are always looking at these, when we'll go to use, value, all of those things, we are at the same time looking at them as they exist within this totality, right? The social totality, the social being, right? So for one, so it's a way to signal, like, this is where we start, right? We start from the society as such. And then, so that's partly, yeah. The other one is, okay, I guess, yeah, another aspect about wealth also. So, for example, John Holloway takes slightly, there is a say a danger in how he approaches of looking at wealth in a very almost a very subjective or subjectivist kind of a way, that wealth could be, for you, wealth could be the colors of something, or wealth for me could be the smell of the air. I don't know, like, I mean the thing is, in a certain sense, even all of those could become aspect or the content of wealth. But the point for me is, first of all, to notice that it's not just wealth in that, or what at least what support do I have, at least to say that wealth isn't, for Marx here, anything like that, anything subjective, individual in that sense, is just even this fact that he says the wealth of societies, right? And maybe Rudy can confirm this, or or either way, right? In German, like it's a wealth. It's not just wealth by itself. It is wealth always of societies, right? It's always social. Wealth itself is already something that belongs to, in that sense, the collective, and not something that exists by itself or something, right? So for one aspect of wealth itself, right? We'll get to the tummy too, right, in the first page. But right, so wealth A is of societies, but insofar as we are talking about wealth of societies where capitalist mode of production prevails, it appears as an immense collection of commodities. So what that means is the appearing, right? The appearing is the form of appearance, right? Appearing is the form it takes, because essence needs to appear for it to be accessible. And so this is the form in which it appears. So how we can access wealth in any way, if we can, within these societies, it is in their form of commodities. So that for me essentially is both in terms of the relation between wealth and commodities, right? And also where we are beginning from. And then just to make sure, okay, we do not yet have an exact like a concrete content. We haven't defined any content to wealth itself, and so in that sense we are not really, say, ontologizing wealth. We are not saying this is the substance of wealth. No, we are only positing it as this this thing which is relates to the social, that is a social thing, and then that it will have a form of appearance, and that it is through that form of appearance that we can then determine what it is, to the extent that it is connected to that form of appearance, right? Okay, that those I think would be my points to make about this first sentence. Now, okay, one thing that I guess in a sense did miss before jumping into the first sentence is the chapter and the title of the chapter itself. Or I guess now maybe I can take a couple of steps back, and so the first chapter, let's just to sort of signal, I guess, signpost this. The first chapter is okay, and I guess this brings me to one of the things that Dave pointed out. So a sort of a a very overview of, okay, what the three books are at least about, right? So the first book, and this is the first volume, right? The first volume is titled "The Process of Production of Capital," right? Or which I guess can also be said as the capitalist production process, or which is essentially, I think this translation in my sense is pretty good, that it is the process of production of capital. So the product, or what is being produced, what we are discussing here, is the production of capital, right? That for me would be the first point to note about this first book. Okay, first point, that we are talking about capital's production, and not production of specific things. And secondly, we are talking about the production, right? And I know as we get into debates, right, this is one of those points that often comes up, that this is only one side of the story. This is only the production side of the story, right? And it is, to an extent, that is absolutely true too, right? So primarily this book is laying out the aspects of production, right? And then, so I guess to a certain, okay, let me just also mention, then in the second book we'll go into circulation, right, which is the process of exchange, or how Marx titles it, the process of circulation of capital. Right, again, the object being capital, right? And so the first one was about, again, the process of production, because obviously production is a process, right? The process of production of capital. The second is the process of circulation of capital. That's where we'll basically look at, okay, so how does capital, after being produced, essentially gets reproduced? So in other words, the second volume is also about the reproduction of capital, right? Or also at the same time, so this is also one thing that can be sort of pointed out, that in the first book, and again, because to an extent Marx is proceeding from the abstract, the more essential, the more, in a certain sense, more isolated look, or at isolated, the process itself, right, in a certain way, as say it is going on within one factory or something, right? That's the level that for the most part Marx will remain in the first volume. I mean, obviously he zooms out too, but insofar as looking at the aspects of capital, he's staying within, individual sort of processes. Specifically, the second volume will arrive at the more broader total, or what can be called the collective. So at the collective capital, or also on the other hand, the collective worker, right? So these will also become some important categories as we go into the second volume, right? And so when we are talking about the reproduction, both the simple reproduction and the expanded reproduction of capital specifically, right, those will become the important, focus on the second volume. And that, that often comes up, especially for, for Rosa Luxemburg, or a lot of these debates about imperialism, because, then we are in the domain of the expansion of capital, right? Because the circulation is important, right? Because that is where value will be realized, so that it can go back into, production on an expanded scale, all of that, right? Yeah. So but at the same time, the collective worker also, because how is the worker himself, or the working class or whatever itself, both reproduced and sort of both simply and expandedly, in a sense, right? I mean, again, these are aspects that Marx will actually also already highlight in the first volume too, right? So for example, reproduction, Marx does talk about in volume 1 too, but then he'll go on to talk about it in more details in the second volume, right? So a lot of these things, so that would be the second volume, which will essentially be about the circulation and how does, capital comes back, or the various metamorphoses of capital in its various forms, that stuff. And then when we go to the third one, that is now, in a certain sense, now bringing it all back, at least this level of the economic, very like narrowly put, right? The economic in this very, the economy, capital, labor, whatever, all of that, but only the economic side of things, because that is partly also my contention, that obviously all of this book and all of these, even economic categories, understood narrowly economically, or understood economic in the narrow sense, are also at the same time, these are political categories. And this is also at the same time a political narrative, or narrative of how politics plays itself out within societies where the capitalist mode of production prevails, right? Now, so then when we come back to the third volume, right? So the third volume will be the capitalist process as a whole, right? So then that's when we'll also look at, right, profit, credit, the financial, financialization, those aspects, all of these things. So for example, the question of, transformation of wages into the wages into the money, right? Or surplus value into profit, right? Look, those transformation aspects will get into the third volume. And I mean, so one way to say that is, so it is, as we move from the first volume to that third volume, this is that another way of, the development, or the unfolding, or the, the development from the essentials, or from the essence to its mode of appearance. And okay, and that also reminds me to make sure to point out this other aspect. When every time we are talking about appearance, that is, again, appearance is not a matter of how things appear to us simply in thought, right? The appearance is already a category of the external social reality itself. So for example, profit is not simply how we think, or how we misperceive, in a certain sense, surplus value, but profit is a category of reality itself that that surplus value will take. Okay, sorry. First is production, second is circulation, and we can, reproduction is already a part of that circulation, right? And then, yes, third will be, banking, finance, right? stock, sure. Rent also, definitely rent, interest, all of that will be part of the third volume, right? So oftentimes the question that comes up, yeah, like if for example, based on the first chapter of the first volume, if there is the labor theory of value, well, how do we account for the fact that land costs something? Or say, and I know that these things were coming up in the comments too, right? The virgin soil, or yeah, or even Theo, some of the comments that Theo had posted from Heinrich, right? Or some of the quotes where Heinrich actually points this out in that already, that yeah, that yeah, that so the answer to that will be, sorry, I'm just distracted a bit. The answer to that, okay, well, about rent, and the answer to, well, how can something like land, especially even something like virgin land or whatever, how can that have a value or a cost, right? Or does it have a value or cost? These are things that Marx will more explicitly get into in the third volume, even though he does kind of again sort of signal them in the first volume itself. Sorry, just keep getting messages and I don't know how to silent them.
Do you have if you pull down on the top of the phone, the do not disturb option? Do you see that?
Yeah, I thought I did that. Okay. I just did the work setting. Maybe that doesn't stop the messages.
They're like, you're at work. Now you have to be reached. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I think I managed now.
Yeah, but you sound like a very popular guy, I have to say, like
No. This is just my wife.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad you're popular with her. Okay.
All right. Yeah, so coming back to the point, I mean, and that is interesting, and that is fun too, like the whole question of land and its value, or the fact that it costs something. This actually comes up a lot, specifically in the eco criticism, eco socialism, like eco debates essentially. And in my view, I guess I'll just put this one out. My preference for the moment lies with this guy Burkett. He has this great book where he just beautifully lays out Marx's whole approach to land and the question of value in land, or whatever, the rent, what does rent mean? But also, yeah, Marx does, I'm going to try to find that page. I did not mark it for this session, but there is one point where Marx explicitly sort of states in the first volume itself, what rent and profit and interest, they are these various forms. Again, this is how he'll put it. These are various forms of manifestation of value. These are various modes in which value gets distributed. But without getting, too much into that part, I think, did we sort of more or less address, I mean, yeah, in the end, that will come up as we go along, or, cool. All right. So now, okay, wait,
sorry. Yeah, I also shared the notes document here. So the idea with the notes document, everybody, is Nance and I have the ability to add notes. You all have commenting abilities where you can suggest additions, and then we can accept or deny those. But if you really are good at note taking and stuff, and you want me to add your email in there so you can just kind of take charge with the note taking, then just, don't send me your email where it's going to be seen in the recording. I don't want to have to go edit it out. That's my main thing. But I guess when we're thinking about notes, don't try to write down everything, right? That I think this is pretty basic stuff, especially for a lot of you, but I also figure it is worth saying a couple things on that. And then Sahil, you can add to that if you have some further suggestions. I mean, you're probably a good note taker yourself, I imagine. No, all I'm saying is that like note taking is a sort of art, and it's a work in progress for both myself and Nance. That's why we want you to be able to give suggestions when you think we missed something. But also what I'm saying is don't try to write everything down. You're trying to distill what you're hearing down to its essence. And then we have that there. And then, of course, you could always go back and watch the whole thing yourself, but you shouldn't have to write down everything. That's the main.
All right. Cool. Okay, yeah. Coming back to the point. Okay, yeah. What also brought me back to the whole 3 volumes. But also going back now to the structure to an extent of the first volume itself. So to the extent that we are in the first chapter is about the commodity, right? That first chapter, first of all, forms part of the part 1 of book 1, which is the commodities and money, right? So this first part, which is the 3 chapters, right? Chapter 1, 2, 3, which will, sort of go over from the commodity to the money, to money itself, which again, at the same time, will happen within the first chapter too, right? Within the first chapter, Marx also goes from the commodity to the money, but then we'll go into more details into money in the third chapter. But then, so this is the first part, right? And then part 2 would be, then we'll move from the transformation of money into capital, right? I'll just mention a little bit these various parts and to get a certain sense of the totality, because there's actually a lot also to be said about the structure of the first volume as a whole too, which is like, I find it pretty interesting and it is significant. But yeah, so the second part, right, that's the transformation of now money into capital. So we went from commodity to money, from money to capital. Then various aspects of capital and what goes into the composition and the production of capital. Then to part 3, which is again a certain more expansion of the aspects of capital, right? The part 3 will be the production of absolute surplus value. So value as this one of the first starting points for us in the first chapter itself will continue to be this essential part, right? To its relation with capital, to its relation with production. And obviously, this is a process of production of capital, right? Which is the book 1 we're looking at, right? So then we'll go deeper into what is absolute surplus value. And then the next part 4, relative surplus value, absolute versus the relative, right? And in between all of this, we'll see, this is these parts consist of certain of the chapters which come across as more explicit ones regarding class struggle. Or finally, these are some chapters like the working day where Marx actually is talking about some class struggle, and everything else is like this dry economic stuff or something. Part of the point for me would be to be able to highlight that all of those categories, the economic seemingly categories, how they are already political categories, how they are already crystallizations really of class struggle itself, right? But these will often. Okay, then from there, I guess I will just instead of naming all of them, I'll just highlight this one point that actually Frederick Jameson points out in his book on representing capital. It's called that. So the first 7 parts really of the first volume are like a kind of a synchronic presentation of what's going on, whereby like this is the structure, this is the internal circulation or internal relations between these different elements of how these various elements relate to each other, right, within the structure. So these are the first 7 parts. And then there's almost a change in modality as we move to the 8th part, which is, so to the extent that everything is sort of circular, everything becomes circular and interrelational in the first 7 parts. In the 8th part, which is the part on another famous so-called primitive accumulation, that is when Marx will change modalities and turn into like a historical presentation instead of the structural presentation, right? But the important thing to note is that they are both, like both of these, modes of presentation, they are still modes of presentation of that same thing, which is capital. And how, I guess, one of the another references that I totally did not bring until today was the reference to economic and philosophical manuscripts, the infamous early Marx, right, which has become a little more difficult for us these days, given Althusser's interventions, but I still think that they have a lot there.
Sorry, I didn't mean to hit that twice, but I hate Althusser and I love young Marx, and I think Althusser was wrong. I mean, Althusser admits to being wrong, basically in a very French way, which is to say, he just kind of waves his hands a lot. But he, in his preface to his reading Capital, he's basically like, we didn't have the sources, we were going off of the best knowledge we had. He's just a lot more confident when he actually So you taking it seriously, 100%. We take it seriously too. Everyone should take it seriously. It's wonderful stuff. Of course, there's still this possibility that he's more Feuerbachian then than later, and that might be Althusser's strong point. But this rupture, I don't know what that rupture, like that, it's a little overblown. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, we'll get to it. But my point being, like, why I mentioned this again. Okay, as we'll develop through the first chapter and the first parts and everything, especially as we move from the realm of circulation into the realm of production proper within the first volume itself, right? So to the extent that the part on money and commodities and money is still talking to an extent or looking at these commodities within exchange or whatever in the realm of circulation. As we move then into the hidden mode of hidden abode of production, right, there Marx will signal some of these things which help us in a certain sense read some important parts of economic and philosophical manuscripts, right? So okay, let me just, I'm gonna try to go in now with the the use value. Oh no, okay, again, my bad. So I moved too much ahead with the structure of the first book, but now the point was to first highlight the title of the first chapter, which is the commodity, right? But then also the subtitle of this chapter, which is, so commodity, what we'll be looking at in the commodity are the two factors, right? Again, the dual character of all these things which we'll see, right? So the two factors of the commodity, which are, and again, this is important, and this will go to respond to an extent to another of these questions that often come up, right? These objections about there is a difference between exchange value and value itself, like they're not the same thing, and I agree, right? And we'll get into what's the difference. But so what the two factors that Marx is pointing out here, mentioning at least in the title, are use value and value, and not really exchange value, right? And so about value, right, then in parentheses there is the substance of value and then the magnitude of it, right? Now then we'll go into so what are these, in a sense, two sides of value itself, which is the substance and then the magnitude. Okay, we'll get into that. But before we do that, so now let's take a few steps back and, coming back to the first sentence that we were discussing, and, everything that the first sentence is already bringing to us, the social totality, the social being, and our starting point. Now, we have, to the extent that we have isolated or we've seen that wealth presents itself as the collection of commodities, and, then the individual commodity being the elementary form. So let's zoom into what this individual commodity itself is, right? Or what is it composed of, right? So the commodity is, first of all, an external object, a thing which through its qualities satisfies human needs of whatever kind, right? Now, and whatever kind, right? The nature of these needs, whether they arise from the stomach or from imagination, makes no difference, right? Now this is for one. Now this, let's just, okay. Now these are objects of consumption or even use to the extent that they're used as a means of production. They're again both the same, right? This is essentially what now we are talking about, the use value side of the commodity, right? Use value to the extent that it has a qualitative, so how I will put this is, and now a lot of the terms that I'll be using, they come directly from the Pathik Ghosh's essay on the, 3 provisional theses on the concept of value. Now, what I'm saying is, so use values, right? Use values, what Marx is saying is, these are qualitatively singular material, objects, right? They are singular in the sense to the extent that, materially this thing is different from this thing, right? And they are use value, or what makes them use values is the fact that they have, precisely for one, that they have these material physical properties and that allow them, and again to the extent that they are use values, they have a potential, right? They have a potential for use, because in themselves they are these composite materialities, right? But by themselves sitting on the shelf, they do not automatically even become use values. For them to really become use values, I need to actually use them, right? To put them to use, which is, and Marx will say this too, right? The use of use values is their consumption, right? Or it is their actual, which is in their consumption, which is also the destruction of their materiality, which is also their negation, right? In one sense. But so now this is the material, this is the stuff of use value, right? And again, what defines use value? It is not a matter of, any individual or any certain located group's decision. It is a spontaneous result, right? Almost an unconscious result of the collective, social whole, in a certain sense, to the extent because this collectivity is unconscious, so it doesn't really matter how many people or if anybody, I mean, as long as there is somebody who finds, irrespective of whether their need arises from stomach or from their imagination, from their fancy, to the extent that somebody thinks they want this thing, whatever it is, it has a use value. So, and to the extent that that material, thing has a use value, then we'll get into the, later part. It can be a material depository for value. But let's just make sure to, first thing to make sure of, that use value is any concrete, specific material, composition, right, which satisfies some need, any need. And need is also very broadly defined in here. It's not in the sense of, oh yeah, need versus want. No, need here already includes want too, right? Because for somebody that wants something, at least in their head, they want it because they know they can use it in some sense. So it's even wants encompass use values, right? So just to make sure, okay, that use values are these materialities that make use values possible, that they make them, those things, use values for us, first thing. And insofar as they are these materialities, they are singular. They are singular in the sense that this is not that, right? So what the use that this can satisfy for me, this thing cannot, right? So they are singular, and they are singular in the sense, or their singularity. Yep. Like, yeah, Lucas said, right? Right. So insofar as they are singular, what that makes them is they are incommensurable, right? And this is again a term that Marx will use. Their singularity, the material singularity of use values, makes them incommensurable. Again, this is precisely the point that I said. The use that this can give me, this other thing cannot. So if I'm, whatever, hungry, thirsty for this, like, and you give me the same value, say, if this is $1 and this is $1, you give me $1 of this and say, well, it's the same thing, doesn't serve me, because these things are incommensurable. Needs and use in that sense is incommensurable, right? Now, this is the point where we need to, okay, so yeah, maybe maybe I will. All right, I haven't today a lot. Okay, yeah, the point being, okay, so use value, material property, singularity, it is the most concrete, and it is what makes something incommensurable. Now, let me just make sure. Now, its materiality is what makes it the material bearer of a different thing, which is exchange value. Now, of course, Marx, to an extent, he'll mention exchange value first, but then he won't really explore the specificity of exchange value itself, but then just say that exchange value simply means that now these two singularities, two use values which were singular and thereby incommensurable at first, exchange value is that which actually, in a certain sense, negates that incommensurability or that singularity of that use value. Because now, to the extent that we were looking at these two things as use values, what this can do for me, the other cannot, right? And yet, exchange value will suddenly turn this thing into something exchangeable, something exchangeable, commensurable, right? In fact, so not only exchangeable, right? Not only that one thing can replace the other, but also commensurable in the sense that I can actually measure the two in relation to each other, right? Now, again, as use values, they are incommensurable. Like there is no material basis on what basis can I even compare, okay, two vapes equals what number of pencils, right? That's an absurd, measurement, right? Like, or two vapes, yeah, it does not make sense. Like we do not have any materially common thing, right? And this is where, yet, in a magical sort of way, exchange value comes in and it will turn doesn't matter what material property it is, and doesn't matter what material not only in the physical sense of this, but even services or whatever, right? Any actions, right? Because actions are also material, right? And they produce effects, right? Yeah, right. So all of these things, everything can have an exchange value, as long as, insofar as something has a use value, it can be the material bearer of exchange value, thereby turning this unique singular thing into now suddenly replaceable, right? Now, this is the quality that exchange value has. Then, so Marx, instead of actually going into what exchange value really is, will just point out that now if these two things now can be exchanged, what this indicates to us is there has to be, because as use values, when we are comparing these two things, there was like nothing materially common between them, which could serve as the basis for their commensurability, right? But to the extent that they are actually in practice exchangeable, and remember, we are within a social being where all these things are exchangeable, right? To the extent that they are exchangeable, that implies a substance, right? It implies a certain basis which allows for common measure between all these things, right? Commensurability between these material singularities. Now, this is where we are already entering the metaphysical part of side of things, the metaphysical side of reality itself, the metaphysical side of these things, these real material things, which we interact with every day, which we do not really realize, and yet are these metaphysical things, right? So now this, right? Yep. So this social being, right? The social being, which has made this new substance real, right? And this is where we will eventually sort of also get to the point of, okay, where is value? Is it in exchange or is it in, production in a certain sense? We'll get to that. Okay. Yeah. So now we have arrived at value, right? So what is value? Value is this unreal substance, because it is not material, right? Because unlike use values, which consist of the concrete materiality, therefore the singularity of things, value is something which is universal, which is something assumed, because unless it is universal, it cannot be the basis for the exchangeability of all things, right? Of all these singular, incommensurable materialities, right? Yeah. So now let's look at another thing. So to the extent that now, okay, another term that I want to sort of bring in here about use value insofar as it is incommensurable singular, what it designates is a qualitative difference, right? Absolute qualitative difference. As a quality, it is absolute difference. Now we are considering a new quality, new substance, right? A new substance, which is value. The specific character of this new substance is that it does, and now oftentimes we often tend to think of use values as the side of quality and of value as the side of pure quantity. That's not exactly the case. Now, insofar as value is the substance, right, of the form, value is itself, it is a quality. It is that quality that all these different singularities, erstwhile singularities, let's call them, or potential singularities, also possess this other substance, this metaphysical social substance, which allows for the common, the exchangeability, the replaceability, the commensurability of all these different materialities. So to the extent that value is the substance which is both common to them all, it is a quality, and it allows for all of them to be exchanged. The quality of value is that of, or the effect of things becoming value is that of qualitative equalization, right? So now, use value is qualitative difference, pure absolute qualitative difference. Value is precisely the qualitative equalization of all these what was qualitatively different, right? And then to the extent that the commodity is in a certain sense the cohabitation of these two aspects, use value and value, it is this contradictory unity of two things which are by nature exactly opposites, which is pure qualitative difference, and on the other hand, qualitative equalization. The different and the same, right? So insofar as some things are values, they're all the same. Their qualitative substance is the same material, right? Insofar as things are use values, what defines them as use values is precisely their difference. So the commodity encompasses within itself a dialectical cohabitation of these opposites, literal opposites, which are, and this will be essentially Zonrathel's point. So what do use value and exchange value really represent? These are embodiments within the thing of certain practices, right? In the sense that use value signifies use, the practice of using something. Exchange value signifies the practice of exchanging something. Now, it is as soon as we start thinking of these two terms, use value and value or exchange value, we are already, and to the extent that we start thinking of these in terms of practices, we can already see how they are mutually exclusive. You may use it. If you use it, you may not exchange it. If you're going to exchange it, you may not use it. You can only really do one of the two things that this really the thing is composed of, right? A thing as it exists, it consists of both these opposite, mutually exclusive things, but the reality is only one may become real, right? In that sense. Yeah, okay. Now, so use value was qualitative difference, value is qualitative equalization. So now what, and okay, now Marx, of course, as he goes into value, he's already indicating, the point, it's prior substance, which is the social substance of abstract labor, right? Or the dual character of labor itself, which is the concrete and the abstract. I guess we can follow that path, but I'm just going to indicate already how value relates to exchange value. So now, insofar as value is the substance of all these things, the universal, the essentially the infinite kind of substance, and that underlies all these, or cohabits, right? Co-inhabits with, along with use values, all these commodities. Now, exchange value is its quantitative. Oh, yeah, the quantitative side, right? So yeah, so exchange value will basically become quantitative differentiation. So let's look at now from the move from use value, and then exchange value. So with use value, we had qualitative differentiation, right? Pure qualitative differentiation. One thing is different from the other in through its quality. From these qualitative singularities, qualitative differentiation, we move to value, which is qualitative equalization of all these things. From once now everything becomes a quality, the equal same substance, now and which allows them now to actually have a relation with each other, then we move on to the next step, which is quantitative differentiation. So now, because in material practice, they can still not really remain the same. They can never, everything cannot in practice be the same, but now they will be differentiated no longer based on their quality, but now simply they will still be differentiated, but now on the basis of their quantity. So what earlier as use values were two different things will now come into relation as more value or less value, but both the same substance except in their relation of quantity, right? So from qualitative relationality, we arrive at quantitative relationality, right? And now we can also at the same time look at the other side of this equation, which is, now we were looking at this both the dual character, because exchange value is only really the mode of form of manifestation of value, right? And so why is Marx only calling it the dual character, not the triadic sort of character or something? Because the substances really are just dual, right? There are only two substances involved here: the substance of use value, the materiality, and the substance of value, it's material, common substance, right? That metaphysical theological substance that allows it to be commensurable and qualitatively the same, right? And exchange value is merely its magnitude, right? Exchange value is what expresses the magnitude and not really the substance, right? So the other side of this, as it relates to the side of labor, this is something to an extent, it can be a little weird to say, but Marx is not really, elaborating on certain aspects of this on the side of labor, all the implications this has, although one can already derive these. Yeah. So yeah, right. So we are moving from use value to value, and from value to exchange value. What we have is singularity to qualitative, commensurability, right? And from qualitative difference to qualitative equalization, and from qualitative equalization to quantitative differentiation, right? So now in the same way, now when we look at labor, turns out in reality labor is also a useful activity, right? Labor, okay, I produce, a cigarette, or I create a table, or, a useful activity, right? It's a concrete activity. It takes certain number of like hours or certain time, and you interacts with material things and produces something, right? So that would be the concrete side of labor. And therefore, insofar as it is concrete and connected to physical material bodies, the body of the worker, and the body of the raw material, all of that, it will also be variable, because again, we are still within the realm of use values. We are thinking in terms of materialities. So it will also be qualitatively different. So the table I will produce, the table Nance will produce, the table Lucas will produce, they will all be different, or it will take different time or something, right? But this qualitative difference, that all singular performances, singular performance of labor presents, these are in a sense then negated by abstract labor. In the same kind of way, just like the singularity of use value was essentially negated by the qualitative equalization of value, in the same way, the qualitative difference of concrete labor will then get negated by abstract labor, which makes everything the same, right? Which allows for all these various different concrete labors to become commensurable in the same way as value did for use value, right? Now, the other side of things, the third, in a sense, the third term, to the extent, or say the exchange value to value that we looked at in the term in the case of commodity, what would that be when we look at, or what would be the implications of this dual character for labor? That labor itself goes through the same these moves, right? From qualitative difference in labor, or the bodies that are qualitatively different, right? Human bodies, which are qualitatively different, first go to a qualitative equalization. This is basically the grounds for, and this is something Marx will indicate at the end of, I think, the 6th chapter, right? What Marx says is that the exchange, the realm of circulation, or the realm of exchange, is the Eden of the very innate rights of man. It's a very interesting statement, and how that pertains to what we're talking about right now is that, now see, it is only in bourgeois society, let's say, that we get the notion of a real notion for the first time of universal human equality, right? All human beings are essentially equal, essentially the same. The thing is, if we want a materialist account for these notions, these ideologies, like what makes them even possible, where do they emerge from, this right here is the grounds, is the conditions for such a notion to emerge. Because in social practice, as the realm of circulation already becomes so expansive that it already includes everything, and especially also labor within its domain, right? Then when labor itself attains this dual character, whereby prior to this labor was qualitatively different, one could not even arrive at a notion of how could all these bodies be the same. It is only through this qualitative equalization of all these human bodies, right, that happens through the exchange of the products of all these various different concrete labors and the concrete use values, that you arrive at the notion of qualitatively equal human beings. And then, but now, because this is again already within the logic of the commodity, that dialectic doesn't stop at mere equalization. That qualitative equalization then also needs in concrete form to present itself as quantitative difference. So then, on the one hand, simultaneously, on the one hand, we have the notion emerge of universal human equality, but at the same time, we also get racist notions of more human and less human, right? Then at the same time, and because now it is a matter of degree, who is more human and who is less human. And so not only the human attains a value, the human attains a certain exchange value, which is a quantitative relation between, different humans, right? And this obviously, insofar as, and precisely because the human being is now also a commodity, that the human being also has this dual aspect. It has its concrete side, its material, sensuous, qualitative different side, and then the qualitatively equal side of things. So that essentially, that is one way, I suppose, to put the relation between value and exchange value. How they are both to an extent different. They are not exactly the same, but that is where their relationship, exists, right? Okay, let's take another pause.
Well,
are you?
Okay,
and then I'll.
Okay, Daniel, go.
No, I just want to say Sahil's awesome. I mean, I could only dream of a world where people were moved into Marx, really paying attention to the sociological. I'm using the word sociological just from my work with belonging. The sociological conditions necessary to create markets, if you will, or to create capitals like that has to be generated. And so there has to be this, I talk about the equal sign, like you have to make things equal, but there's no equal sign in reality. And so you have to make something plausible to people as if it is just as real as this pen, and yet it isn't real like this pen, and yet it has the same kind of authority. And then according to that, people can operate and be socially intelligible to one another. You have to create that paradigm, zeitgeist, I'd call it a situation. If you don't create that situation, it doesn't happen, because no one's going to look at a pen and go, oh, that's equal to this. You don't do that. There has to be a situation that's created. And I just want to say, I really also like how you were talking about the abstraction of materialism. That's so important. So I just really appreciate what Sahil has been saying. This has been lovely.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guess I'm just trying to think, like, there's, I've like touched less than half, really, in a certain sense, of the first chapter. And even this, like, there is more, there's more to it too. The things that I have said. My problem, this is partly my own, problem, my own anxieties, which is like I don't want to miss out on anything. I want to say it all, in a certain sense, which is obviously impossible. It's almost like, this is basically the contradiction of value too. Value wants to be all, in a sense, and in its essence, it is all, and yet it is bound by the material, the limitations of materiality, because it always has to essentially, present itself, embody itself, right? It cannot exist without a body, and that is another thing that we see in this first chapter, right? Use values can exist without value, but value cannot exist without use values. Value needs use values to carry it. They're the bearers, right? Right. So, yeah, like, I mean, I was just talking about, I was thinking about my own anxieties about sort of missing out on certain points. And then I guess through this chapter, as we'll actually move, I guess, like, without really going right now too deep into this, there was another comment, I think, in one of the live streams, the last live stream, which came up, and to which this will be another one of the sort of outrageous takes, if you want, or that usually will not be accepted, most probably, like in most circles at least. What I will say is, especially in today's, in capitalism, really, irrespective of if the labor or the product of labor actually exchanges hands with money, like one of the standard, understandings is that labor which does not get exchanged does not have value, or that does not have exchange value. Or rather, we can look at it from the other side, which is, well, it did not have an exchange value because it did not, get exchanged, especially with money, right? And insofar as something did not get exchanged and did not have an exchange value, more precisely, therefore it had no value in that sense, right? It only had use value. So which is where the whole question, or the whole debate and a specific aspect of the Marxist feminism, or the women's question and that stuff comes in, where a lot of people have tried to argue that no, housewives labor or all of that also produces value in the capitalist sense, not value in the moral sense of things. No, that's also valuable, not in that sense, but specifically in what we are, in the terms that we are talking here, right? In the sense that it has, does it have abstract labor? Now, again, this is also where partly the sort of debate, the Mosley Heinrich debate about, okay, if something, because that in like value really becomes real if it does actually exchange hands, does get realized in the market. If it is only retroactive in this moment, right, or only retroactively exists really as abstract labor, as the substance of value, if it gets exchanged, because it is a retroactive reality and not pre-exists before that, right? Because if that is the case, then absolutely, right, then say the labor of a housewife would not have value in the capitalist sense. But that is for me, no. Insofar as we started with the givenness of the social being, insofar as we started with the givenness of the logic of the market, real empirical acts of exchange, in fact, the point is, when we begin with the givenness, or in Daniel's terms, with the situation, right, when we begin with the situation, that retroactivity is already presupposed. So every labor that is now, or every material use value that is, so now already, as soon as I have a use value, it already has a value. Doesn't matter if I put a price tag on it or not. Doesn't matter if I actually go out and say, okay, I'm ready to sell this. No. Insofar as I have a use value, because, and this is the point about the, in the Lacanian psychoanalytic terms, consider this the symbolic order, the big other. The big other, and so that first sentence, the social being was the big other. And that social being or the big other does not care if, once I produce a use value, the other does not care if I want to sell it or not, if I'm actually just holding it, keeping it away from people's eyes or whatever. No, the big other sees it all. The big other knows it has value. And it might even, as soon as, the agents of the big other, if they hear about it, they might actually, sneak in and try to even take it away. Why would they take it away if this is not on the market? No, because they know it has value. Because they will steal it and then they will put it on the market. They are just the agents. The symbolic other, the big other, is out there and it knows, right? So and insofar as all objects in this situation, within this social totality, insofar as they all these objects have both value and use, or use value and value, right? The labor that I performed to make this, the concrete labor that I performed to make this, already has, insofar as this has value, my labor was already abstract labor, right? My labor is already abstracted. And what that implies is, all of us as individuals, if you want to call it, as the subjects of this big other, we are already labor power. We are already these commodities labor power, whose performance of their activity, right, their concrete activities, will always already be abstracted, irrespective of if I want to monetize it or not. If I want to monetize my activity or not, it already has a value. It already has a price in the eye of the big other. And or this is the other way in which the big other is basically the name of God. Or let me put this specific thing in another way. The socialist societies in which the capitalist mode of production prevails is actually the first society in which God really is real. God is no longer a matter of belief. God is no longer a matter of, okay, I don't have to, oh yeah, because if you start believing in those other kinds of notions of God, right, these all powerful whatever, okay, yeah, it doesn't really affect you if you really stop believing in it. No, in this case, this God, this big other, this thing that, the social totality that sees it all, that knows I have something precious, something valuable, this God is real. Doesn't matter if I don't believe in it. It still functions. This is that Žižekian joke of, the scientist who, I guess Niels Bohr or whoever, right? He visits Sweden or whatever. He puts up that horseshoe on his door and he says, yeah, I don't believe in it, but they say it still works even if you don't believe in it, right? So yeah, like, I mean, I guess for today, I can, for the major part of it, like, going into this deeply, I can stop. But in terms of, I guess leaving with some of these points, what do you think? I can go on, I guess, but
no, man, that's fantastic. And we had talked about having a little time for Q&A here at the end. So Lukas, Rudy, Nance, you'll get your chance here in a sec. I think I just wanted to say about your hot take there at the end that it doesn't come off as so hot of a take when you put it that way. I think that it makes a lot of sense when you put it that way. When you bring in, say, the big other, and it's like what? So yesterday I'd use the example of something that's never gonna make it to market or whatever. But yeah, but it potentially could. That's the point. And also when it was made, I guess that's the thing. Is like, is it that it's when it was made? It's still, there's always this socially necessary labor time is always there. Like you can't get outside of it. So then, a person who goes and tries to do the Robinson Crusoe lifestyle, right? The favorite example of all political economists, right? Well, that person still has an idea of socially necessary labor time. You can't get outside of that idea. But then it's not just an idea. Now that's where I get a little confused because it's like, well, could you get outside of a system of capital and just make your own useful things? And it's not just an idea anymore. I mean, you're away from it and it's, I don't know. So I get a little confused there, but everything you were saying made sense.
For sure. Would you like me to, respond to that already, or do you want to take or let me just go ahead in that case. Yeah. Okay. See, with the Robinson Crusoe, objection, if you want, or question, whatever, right? The problem with that, to begin with, is it's a false premise. In the sense that, first of all, there is no such thing as an individual living by himself in a and having his or her whatever, like their own society. No, you could choose right now for sure to be like, okay, I'm gonna just find some virgin land somewhere and be live off the grid, be by myself, whatever, right? All of those things you could do that, and even then though, you will be taking the social being along with yourself. First thing, that's absolutely sure. You, in terms of all the knowledge even that you have about, or even the lack of knowledge when you actually find yourself in the wild, about, okay, because you've lived in the, in civilization, when you find yourself in the wild, you might not even know how much you don't know about that stuff, right? All of that is already the social being in you, which doesn't know. Or the things that you do know when you go there, it is the social being that is with you, which is why Or if you're taking a gun with you, or if you're taking the tools with you, they're already a product of that social being, right? You yourself this individual subject that decides, that chooses to go out, it is nothing. It did not exist. It was not born out there, right? So then the question can be, in one way, okay, it's not a Robinson Crusoe, but like, say, the North Sentinelese tribe, or those tribals who never were, like, who have grown and developed in isolation in a certain sense, that way. That's a whole different question. But the Robinson Crusoe example, it's, first of all, its premises are wrong. But then secondly, I mean, yeah, sure, to that extent, if you are living by yourself and you have the whole day, and all you really need, or you want, or whatever, is to just survive, have enough food and just shelter and everything, to that extent, of course, like, and let's assume you don't have any high-tech tools or anything, right? Yeah, the time it will take for your body to do all of those things, that is the socially necessary labor time. Given if you've genuinely, truly cut off yourself, to whatever extent, if it is possible, thinking in those terms, to actually cut off oneself from society, then that would be it. But the other thing is that the notion of the socially necessary labor time, that is already necessarily a social concept. And it's not simply a concept, but as a reality, it is a necessarily social reality, right? Because, it's in the name itself, socially necessary labor time, right? So first of all, like, everything that we are looking at in this text, right, it's all within, like, it is all considering the givenness of society, right? The social, you cannot escape the social, right? So, yeah, for me, that's,
Yeah, that makes sense.
I guess, what else?
I really appreciate the way you kind of broke down the operation that allows for the dual character. The fact that it is a 3-part operation, where it goes from the use value that is necessarily realized at some point in the future to this amorphous value substance that is then expressed as exchange value. I really appreciate that. I feel like that maybe gets erased. And yeah, I think that's important. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. To that, all I can say is, yeah, often, like, this is to a great extent true. Like, oftentimes we do not, and also, like, yeah, these are certain, I guess, like, nitty gritty, whatever, more close, some might even say hair splitting, level of whatever detail to these. But I think these are crucial aspects to the modalities of, what does use value and value, like, what do their relation and their difference really signify? Because what again, like, another point to highlight how this comes up, like, in what sense this is related, pertains also to the question of, okay, why is, or in what sense is Marx still relevant, in the sense that, to what extent is our world the same? Is the world of Marx, and to what extent is it a different world? The whole point, the problem is, within the domain of capital, it is both different, necessarily different, and also at the same time necessarily the same. So the class society, the capitalist society as it exists, it is essentially necessarily the same, and yet it will necessarily present itself, it will, in concrete forms, it will necessarily present itself in these always changing forms. So you can move from laissez-faire, capitalism, onto, like, monopoly capitalism and imperialism, to, welfare state stage, and then, to neoliberalism or whatever, and yet something remains constant. These are various, different modes in which is not to say that this is all the same in the sense that the composition of value or the stability of value or its own modality is stable. No, that is again precisely all of these, concrete manifestations, and that is the question where partly the political question comes in. Are we able to locate and trace how these different forms that are coming up, what are they, how are they indexing the transformation within this relation of labor and capital, and to what extent is that relation becoming more and more unstable, and what that indicates about how and what forms political struggle itself has to take today. you know like that is, like, I mean, in a certain way, for me, this is why, like, I do emphasize that this first chapter, because for me, like, even already within these dialectics, and the simple determinations of value and use value, we already find, the essential categories that pertain to a lot of what appears, right, what takes material form in our everyday social reality.
What you got, Rudy?
It was right at the beginning, and I brought this up because I think in the Penguin edition, I have not worked through it completely yet, but I feel like it gets, like, Marx gets sanitized in a certain way, because in the German original, in the Penguin edition, it's translated to immense collection of commodities. Yeah, the wealth of societies in which the capitalist mode of production prevails appears as an immense collection of commodities. And in the German original, Marx writes ungeheure Warensammlung, which has more of like a it is this kind of magical or like esoteric writing, because ungeheure, it both means vast in the sublime sense, but also dreadful. So right from the get-go, it's not that sanitized as in the Penguin collection. This is something sublime. I think he implies it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it gives that. See, these are certain, indications, like essentially signals to the theological aspect of this reality, right? Like, it's, or, in trying to remember where was this. Yeah, in economic and philosophical manuscripts, at least, that was one place where Marx refers to, all of this with, for example, the term or the name mammon, which is which is like this deity, right? But like, so there the worshippers of, mammon or whatever, right? Like, we are practical worshippers of this, deity, which is like both this immense, but immense in almost this terrifying sense, right? Like that terrible side of, that immensity, or even the sublime. The sublime itself is both, in a sense, it's like, it's also terrifying. you know yeah.
Yeah, I think it's like when nowadays we look at like pictures from deep space or stuff like that. Like, I think this is more akin to what maybe he stood in front of. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Look at that. Lucas says, yeah, in Polish we have the word for money, mamona. Is that the word for money, or like one of the
Oh no, it's not the word for money. It's more like
yeah.
You don't say it usually, but you can say it. It has a funny vibe to it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Ah.
And I had another, if someone else has something, because at the end now I thought about, and I do not know where it leads us. But when we talked about the big other, I started to think about, is this all true? But the big other also does not exist. You know, like this. Then I started to think while I was listening to you, to like what would be the real, like the encounter with the real in capitalism. Like, can we read Marx through this too? You know, like this is what I thought to think about.
I absolutely think that is possible. And before, yes, absolutely. Like, see, that is the thing, right? I mean, that is the thing about value. So to that extent, like Heinrich is also correct, right? Like, yes, value really, or abstract labor really is nothing. In the same way, yes, the symbolic order isn't really there. It's, and again, in the same sense, the social being, the social totality, like what is that? I mean, like talking materially in that sense, it's just a collection of all of us, lumped together. And yet all of us lumped together, we attain, and precisely it is real because it is this alienation of all of our potentialities, whatever power, but it becomes autonomous. So the whole, the big other, the whole, the social being becomes more true in a sense than any of us, right? And now to this point, like Hegel has the famous, the whole is the true, right? And then, but Adorno will sort of flip that, and he'll say, no, the whole is the untrue. So in the Marxian sense, if we want to read that, what that means is the whole, insofar as is the social being, the social totality, the capitalist totality, more specifically, it is true, but it is the untrue. And then, so I guess, as I would definitely highly recommend, for especially along with the reading of this first chapter, that essay by Pathik Ghosh, the 3 provisional theses, right? He also goes into, in third thesis, he goes into both Pathik and, through basically going through Althusser and then Badiou and then Adorno, on this point of the whole being untrue. And essentially how Pathik will present this is essentially that, so so the whole essentially comes down to, in this tripartite structure that we were looking at of the commodity, to the extent that it is the relation between use value, then becoming value, and then becoming exchange value. So the exchange value, because to the extent that when we look at a commodity, what we see is its exchange value, and we attribute that exchange value to some inherent quality, as if it is this something, and insofar as, and or making this the fetish, right? The fetish object, that this has its own special powers or something. This is the untrue. This is the whole. When we get the whole, this is the untrue. But it isn't simply enough to just recognize that this is the untrue and pronounce that as such, to utter from rooftops that I know the truth now, that this is untrue. No, that's not enough. What needs to be done, first of all, is because even though this is untrue, it is still real. Why? So the first important step is to discover what is the truth of this untrue, right? So what is the true of the untrue in what we are looking at, what Marx is doing? The true of the untrue is value, to exchange value as the untruth, or the commodity as the untruth. The truth to this untruth is value, or abstract labor, as this simple form, right? And then only, and that is the later point that he'll make, it is only when we get to the truth of the untruth that even the opening for truth as such becomes available to us. And that's not enough, again, because it is not simply to arrive at truth as such, whatever it may be. It is not simply a matter of dissecting in thinking, essentially, right? Because we only arrived at the truth of this untrue. Also, we can only do this like contemplatively, in this sense, but in practice, the untrue remains true. right? In practice, the capitalist symbolic essentially continues to function, right? So in any sense, to arrive at what was posed in a certain sense at first, wealth, what true wealth really is, or what is truth in beyond societies where the capitalist mode of production prevails, that can only become accessible if we are able to break this truth, the truth of the untruth, essentially, in that sense.
And because I tried to start reading Adorno's Negative Dialectics and I could not do it, but I know that Gosh uses negative dialectics. So would it be possible, could you like give a, like, I don't know, a simplified overview of like what does this mean, because I'm still operating with Žižekian Hegelian negative dialectics, and I think Adorno's dialectics are different.
Yeah. See, okay. I mean, I'm still working through that. I'll be very honest. There are aspects of it that I have grasped, and mostly because of, the milieu that I'm, coming from. It's so, let me also just say this. Half the things that I know or understand, they come before I actually read the text. They've come because of conversations and like our practices of whatever kind of organization and stuff, right? Half the things for me, half of that comes from there first, and then I encounter them in the text, or at times, and then in a very, but oftentimes how that happens is in an abstract way, and then I have to actually do the labor, right? And then you discover, okay, so for example, even these sort of seemingly minute points of use value, exchange value, in what sense they are more than just these simple economic categories or whatever the names of these things, right? This is something, in our organization, call it whatever, we have talked about a lot, and yet it is only through like hammering it down in the text that it really comes out in that sense, right? I mean, that's just one. I mean, to the extent that's about negative dialectics, there are some things that are just for me, like for example, there's one point on in the beginning itself, Adorno says dialectics is the ontology of the wrong state of things, which I find very like in a certain sense insightful, which is essentially for me like dialectics is in capitalism, and to the extent capitalism is a mode of a form of class societies as such, dialectics is the mode of social being, or the social ontology in that sense, right? And then he says something like a free society or something will be free of it, of the dialectics. So in a certain sense, yeah. Now I'm still, again, I'm still working through it, but it's like, yeah, it's a certain mode of two kinds of dialectics,
Yeah, this is the moment where like my spontaneous reaction is where I'm like, okay, Adorno, but do you want to repeat Marx's move to say to like this like theological approach where you say like, okay, when we can reach the beyond, then everything will change. This is this is where I get suspicious of negative dialectics,
All I would say here is, both regarding Marx and Adorno, I think, well, just like Marx, what he's not really saying, oh, pure freedom or whatever, like pure bliss in, like essentially heaven on earth or something. No, all that implies is the contradictions or the limitations which are social limitations, right? Which are products or results of our own practice, which are the results of our own unconscious practices, coming back to essentially oppress us. That is an aspect that we can, like at least, or to the extent that that is the result of these certain abstractions and certain certain autonomy that the objects as the abstractions of our material practice attain, right? This autonomy, to the extent that we can take away the autonomy from object in that sense, and turn it, because this is a reversal that happens already, right? So to the extent that we can do that, that is one form, or at least that's the freedom that one can even think of, given the form of unfreedom that we have today. For one, that is one, that's for Marx, right? In a similar kind of way, for Adorno, I would say it is so dialectics in that sense. So the idea again is not, and probably, right, Adorno was also one of those people who's like, who took seriously the prohibition against, images or divining the future or whatever, right? Which is like, yeah, it's not really the idea is not, to project or to imagine really, or in concretely what the future, what freedom would look like. Again, it's not to determine the positive content of wealth or of freedom or all of these things, but given where we are, it can only be a negative movement. It's what is communism? It's the real movement that abolishes the present state of things, right? It is the negation of present state of things. It is not the state of affairs to be established. This is Marx, not Adorno, but right. But yeah, like for me, at least, my approach is, to when I'm reading these thinkers, I mean, obviously I try to, my attempt is also to stay as close as the text and to also know what a certain, thinker is not saying. And I don't want to put, words in a thinker's mouth, right? But yeah, like reading them also at the same time, in a sense, against the grain, right? Against themselves even. Yeah. So
next time you'll give us a lecture on negative dialectics. Is that what you're saying? No. All right. I think that's pretty good for now, everybody. I think the 2.5 hour mark is a pretty solid one for these kinds of events. I hope that everybody is excited to get back to chapter 1 of Capital. I know that Nance and I have been kind of itching to get back to Capital. And so this is going to be cool. I think that was you did a really good job. I know you hesitated and you were thinking, oh, I'm missing things. And hey, if anybody would like to come and do it better themselves, you know where we're at. Come on over, see what you got. We'll see what you got. But also, no joking aside, I just want to say, like, if you are watching or listening to this on YouTube or the podcasts, any of the podcasts, there's lots of podcast platforms that this is going to be on, I think. Then yeah, rate it, like it, subscribe to it, blah, blah, blah. But also, like, your comments in terms of your real questions and your actual maybe advice or clear points of clarification, or kind of just whatever you would want to add to this. Please do so. This isn't going away. You should see this as an opportunity to get a basis in the text and to become in dialogue with us here at Theory Underground and with Sahil and everything he's coming out of with the Radical Notes folks and everything like that. So really just great to have you all. Really appreciate it. Sahil, I'll give you the final word here and then we'll close it out.
Yeah, no, absolutely agreed. Like, both in terms of, for people who are new and want to get in, like this, I think can be a great way. That's partly the idea, right? But also if you're already, engaged in it and you wanna, for me, I like, engaging with all these, even the differences and everything. So that would be great too from my side. And I guess, for me, partly to a great extent, like, there are all these various readings, but, I would highly recommend, along with, the first chapter, also reading it's really a short text in a sense, it's not really very long. Rudy has already read it, right? The 3 thesis, the three provisional theses on the concept of value. That one. And obviously, maybe, after we're done with Capital or at certain points, one could also read, the critique of political economy and the question of revolutionary subjectivity, which is also, those ones, like, at least for me, like both politically and theoretically, those have been very formative sort of texts. Yeah, but yeah, this was great. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, everybody. See you at the next one. Take care.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, where workers with earbuds can find genuine liberation from necessity. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching this to the end. Make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe. You know the drill. But, and hey, I know I say that in like this canned way, but it really does make a difference, both for your algorithm and a way of sort of bootstrapping the way the attention economy preys on you into something more, right? It's something more. And a way of kind of going beyond just being a passive consumer of this stuff is actually to get involved. And the best way to get involved is to become a subscriber, because subscribers ultimately have freed me from working at Amazon almost completely at this point. I just take off a lot of time and am able to just focus on Theory Underground. Like right now, I would normally be working at Amazon right now, but I'm taking time off so that I can do this. Well, become a subscriber, and then you can do stuff with us on a weekly, monthly, and once in a lifetime basis. That's kind of the main three kinds of events happening here at Theory Underground. And so I'm going to give you a quick little speed run through some of the best ways to get involved, especially on a weekly basis. That would be through Capital Mondays. If you become a subscriber, you'll be able to be a part of these Capital Mondays lectures and discussion groups, which happen on the first and last Mondays of every month, which, by the way, the time kind of sucks if you're in Europe. Most of the stuff that we do, the European participants are really able to get involved. But yeah, this happens at 5 p.m. Eastern. That's pretty late for you all in Europe. So, yeah, Americans kind of get it first and Europeans watch it in the morning. It's kind of how that works. But the discussions, we might try to make those a little earlier. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, every Tuesday, we have our health and fitness with the Solitariat. That's a really special thing. He's a professional personal trainer. He gives us good advice, but it's also just like a way of checking in, talking about like the things that we've done well and the things that we'll do better next week around. And I think that just doing this is probably going to extend my life by at least a decade or two. And that is a goal of mine. I do want to live long enough to allow the knowledge and understanding and theory I'm cultivating to amount to something. And, part of that is being healthy. And it's one of those things intellectuals can become bad at, myself included. And so, yeah, we do that every Tuesday at 1:15 p.m. Eastern time. I know it says, if you're looking at it, it actually says a.m. That's a typo. All right. And then, and you can read the description and everything like that. If you would rather, instead of me walking you through this, just look at it for yourself, go to the description of this video. You should be able to find this information right there. On Wednesdays, Club de Español, we've got Carl Eugene Stroud, who is a professional language tutor, walking us through the language, doing deep immersion exercises and drills. You don't need a course on Spanish. You need to make Spanish a part of your life, right? A course would be great. A book would be great. Anything you do in the language is going to be great, but nothing's better than just getting outside of your comfort zone, getting into the language. So that's what we're here to do. And then we do the exact same thing the following day on Thursdays.
but with Club Français with Terrence Blake. And if you don't know about Terrence, he's an amazing guy. He's studied under Foucault and Deleuze when he was younger, and now he translates theory and writes theory on his blog. And really great guy. We're excited to meet him in France. But right now, yeah, he's just doing these French immersion exercises with us so that eventually we'll be able to be fluent in French. That's the goal here. And so, yeah, Wednesdays, the Spanish Club, 3 p.m. Eastern. On Thursdays, French Club is at 10 a.m. Eastern. And then monthly ways to get involved with Theory Underground. Now, these monthly events are meant to be few and far between so that you have plenty of time to do other things with your busy life, but still kind of routinely meet with us and get involved. And so the best way to do that is through critical media theory and critical doxology and time energy. Critical media theory meets on the second Sunday of every month, and critical doxology and time energy seminar meets on the fourth Sunday of every month. And if you want to get involved, all you have to do is become a subscriber at the bottom tier. $30 a month gets you everything that I've been reading here, as well as access to one past course per month. Or if you become a tier 2 subscriber, then you get access to these as well as all past courses. Just an absolutely amazing value. You know, if you just think of like the actual value of a course, like that unlocks so much. Higher tier subscribers get access to ongoing and upcoming courses as well. And then also we do a Theory Underground Film Club once per month. It's on the last Thursday of the month at 7:15 p.m. Eastern time. Oh, I didn't say the times for CMT and CDT, but that's always going to be at noon Eastern time. Those Sunday, second and fourth Sunday events. Yeah, and then the once in a lifetime stuff is like the tour, like chances to actually meet us when we come to a city near you. And so we're going to be in Europe this year. So 2024, be looking out for us in Paris, April 26th through 28th. The best way to get involved with that event is to direct message myself or Cadell to reserve a spot, because it's going to be word of mouth only. In Brussels, same deal. We're not going to tell you where it's happening unless you reach out to us directly. But then we'll be doing public events in Poland, in Katowice and Krakow. Those are on May 16th and May 18th. More information on all of this stuff coming soon. And then we'll be in Scotland, which I don't know why it's currently showing Scotland as a place that's in Poland. Let me see if I can fix that right now. It's not how it's supposed to be at all. Let's see. I'm far away from this screen. Maybe I'll just do it later. Trust me. We'll be in Scotland. Just don't. Yeah, it's not in Poland. This document is a draft. Anyway. Last but not least, Theory Underground Conference in October. It's going to be in Mexico. The submission deadline, it says June 1st. It's actually June 15th. And the best way to get involved with publishing at Theory Underground is going to be to come to the event on March 23rd at noon. I think it's like, noon o'clock Eastern time. All right. If you come to that, you'll find out about the different calls for proposals, different themes, kind of the vision for every anthology that we're publishing. And you'll get to meet our new writing workshop master, aka Andy Ridgway, who has a master's and doctorate in composition and cultural rhetoric. And so he's somebody who studied under Todd McGowan, both in his master's and dissertation. And so, yeah, man, if you really want to write and you want to refine your craft, you want to be more persuasive, and people will be able to see like, oh wow, there's something here. I really need to read this. You'll want to be involved with this series of writing workshops that is kicking off on March 23rd. Become a subscriber, message me, tell me you want to be a part of it. That's the best way to get involved. And then, as far as the conference goes, you don't have to be at the conference in the flesh in Mexico to present or to have a piece in one of the anthologies, but you're going to want to, because look, flying from anywhere in the States into Mexico costs the same amount as flying from somewhere in the States to somewhere else in the States. But the nice thing about doing stuff in Mexico is that things are actually affordable. Like, I can't afford to live in the United States right now, right? Like, I had to take 5 months outside of the United States, living in Mexico, just to be able to build Theory Underground, right? And that's why a lot of people, when they're creating content, like, they end up having to live in other countries because the US is just not affordable. But how much more so is that true when it comes to stuff like hotels and Airbnb and food, which are the major expenses when you go to something like a conference. So what we're going to be doing is getting some big spot. Like, I don't know, it's going to be like a mansion. And if you want to be involved, start thinking about it, start setting aside some money. You're going to want to purchase tickets probably in April or June. All right. Well, that's pretty much everything. I know I'm just like, is it smart for me to go on and on at the end of a video like this? No, it's not. In fact, everything says don't do it. Do not make long form content on YouTube. And if you do, don't put yourself standing at a lectern with a whiteboard and a Word document and talk. It's just not smart. And so, well, I don't give a fuck. And neither do you if you've watched to this point. And so, fuck them. We do what we want here. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. Hope you'll get involved. If you are like, that's a lot of cool stuff that you're doing, Dave, but I cannot get involved with all of that stuff. I do not have the time, energy, but I do have money and I do want to support you. Fantastic. Don't become a subscriber. Just become a patron over at my Patreon. So all of that stuff's in the description. And thank you. Thank you for blah, blah, blah. Bye.